the sentiment within these countries for China. So, like the Stan countries right now are showing 30+% unfavorable public opinion towards China, while they maintain single-digit unpopular sentiments towards Russia. So there's going to be a big sort of regional grab for dominance and influence in these resources-rich countries that we should keep an eye out for.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, David. Tyler, you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Thanks, David.
Great. David just shared news. Yeah.
Yeah, I caught it. Thank you for that. David's truly brilliant on all things China. What a great person to follow, as it's plays such an integral role in tech, and it's as a counter perspective. It helps get good perspective on what's happening all over the world, but to see what is happening concurrently in China. So having your on the ground perspective there is invaluable for many reasons. Anybody else? Yeah.
Tyler, I was just joking. When you went offline in the middle of a discussion,
Mm-hmm.
it felt like you're listening to a Joe Rogan kind of podcast, and then he disappears suddenly. And it's like it was kind of weird so we missed you.
Yeah,
for 2
well,
seconds.
good to be back. An internet year later. But let's see if other folks have things they want to share on the stage here. We covered a bit of China, a bit of fintech, a bit of crypto. We did cover just for those who might be joining late here today. We covered the Elon Musk no longer accepting Bitcoin for Tesla purchases, about the big Apple hiring where they hired a key person from Facebook and then very quickly let them go just 48 hours later due to Apple staff questioning that person's misogynistic statements in their previous writings. We covered that the Colonial Pipeline has restarted, and most recently just covered the big Biden signing the executive order to strengthen
By
US...
the way, Michelle has come online since. I don't know if you've seen.
What was the big article that we wanted Michelle's input on Facebook? Oh, the moderation.
Oh, yeah, the moderation.
So, Michelle, we noticed something really interesting here. First, there's two interesting Facebook things today. Facebook's Diem project, the cryptocurrency tied to the US. It's now, as you've told us, it will be pegged to the US stable. It's a stable coin to the US dollar. It says, as reported by CNBC and CNET and USA Today and Reuters and others, that and the Wall Street Journal, that Facebook's Diem says it has withdrawn its application from a Swiss payments license and will shift its operations to the U.S. via a California state chartered bank. That might not be in your wheelhouse, being such a fintechy kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think I think that's interesting. I just need to kind of read on it to understand if it's related, because the reality is that right now in Europe we have the whole data privacy sort of update that we're making across the board on all products, or if this is related to like a financial regulations. I'm not really sure which one led to that decision.
Yeah. And then the other perhaps bigger one was there's multiple articles dancing around the issue of there was a content moderator in Ireland who was saying, it's a very difficult job and it's traumatizing doing all of the moderation. They're exposed to so much incredibly violent and racist and hateful content that's why, that's what happens when you flag something as violent or racist. It gets sent to a human who has to review it. And, we can empathize with how incredibly difficult and even traumatizing that job might be. And then at the same time, there's an article about Facebook needs to do the UK. Where's this article that Poppy shared? Facebook must continue to remove problematic content or face a 10% fine of 10% of their annual revenue in the UK. So that there's two interesting sides to this dynamic of simultaneously, you have a moderator saying how difficult the job is in the Irish government, and then the UK government saying, hey, Facebook, you better keep removing all of this hateful content on Facebook, or people, senior executives at Facebook might face criminal charges and incredibly large fines, as much as 10% of Facebook's revenues. Which, so there's an interesting, dilemma at hand here. I wonder, difficult to comment on perhaps, but if you have,
if I just
let Michelle have the floor here, Karen.
Sorry, Tyler. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to say the first one is actually not news in the sense that unfortunately there's been a few documentaries on this. So there was even one, I think, a couple of years ago from Dispatched on Channel 4.
Right.
I think everyone knows it's an incredibly difficult job to do, and they have they have heavy mental support. And most of the time, because this is something we're trying to do at scale, and when I say we, the same applies for other platforms like Twitter, YouTube, and so on, trying to do at scale. So most of the time, those are third-party companies that are expert in this sort of content moderation at scale that we partner with. So most of the time, they won't be Facebook full-time employees. I just want to contextualize the relationship with these partners. And essentially, their job is to also help our AI get more efficient and train it. So it's not like they will moderate every single piece of content, because that's not realistically scalable if every single human being had to be behind it. But it is a really difficult job to do, and it's not like there's a fix for that, because it is traumatic content they have to watch on a daily basis. But what I know for a fact is that there is mental support, but having mental support doesn't mean that it just makes it slightly easier to cope, but individuals respond differently and have different stress level. But I think it's just another headline of this topic, and it's actually, I would say, even the whole community standards, and even on Clubhouse, I think eventually at some point some conversation might be traumatic. I give an example. What if some people, because it goes from terrorism, beheading people on the platform and wanting to upload that video, to having this, child pornography. So it's very traumatic topics and stressful. But unfortunately, some human being may need to help the algorithm get more efficient in the learning curve. So I think this relates more to that. But it's also the first time on the second one that a government will actually sort of enforce this content moderation and trying to speed it up with a fine. What I can add is that the intention of all platforms is to make it better, because even economically, advertisers don't want to have their content next to it, and the users don't want to have such experience. So the efforts are being scaled, but there's always part of it that the algorithm isn't able to catch. So it's but the intention to fix, to make the experience and keep it better is there.
I think, Michelle, if I can add to that, the biggest elephant that you're missing there is this, right? So where all this news that's coming out, the reason it's coming out now is that they're trying to regulate these big companies, right?
Karen, your connections fell apart. Okay, that's unfortunate, but thank you, Michelle. It's always super valuable to have your inside perspective on this stuff. There was, is my mic on, by the way?
Yeah, you're on.
Yeah, we can.
You're good.
Okay, good. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of other people are sending in lots of headlines, fast and furious. But I wanted to see, while I kind of coordinate those, if anyone on stage had something they wanted to share.
So
I
Tyler,
wanted to ask David,
sorry,
if it's
finish that.
possible.
I think it's an important point.
Yeah, your mic is not working, Kieran. You stopped working about a minute ago.
So the point I was trying to say, the biggest elephant here, Tyler, why we are getting all this news right now is this: the governments are concerned how much of the news that we are seeing in Facebook is influenced by the top level, the CEOs, right? So I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a duality within these big tech companies where they can have a separate department. It can be independently from the the top the influence of, let's say, Mark Zuckerberg and those guys, right? So I think they're trying to clamp these things down. So these tech companies are forced to create this independent department where they are the one in charge independently without any influence from the top level, so they can moderate what information and how is these things being, all this inappropriate content, how is being handled. Because right now the governments can't tell how much of that influence is coming from the CEO Mark Zuckerberg in what content and how it's been taken down. I think we saw that with all of the headlines recently, right? Twitter accidentally removing this, and Facebook accidentally removing Modi's headlines, all of that. How do you know whether that's not coming from the top level or whether it's an accident, genuine accident?
Okay,
So by
pause.
having this,
I got your point. Let her answer. Go ahead, Michelle.
I think it could also be, I mean, I think that's also maybe a good idea, but it could also go for an investigation. So I would just like to understand, what do you think is in it for Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, to mistakenly remove some content from the platform? And I think some of the things that the company stood behind, they own the fact that they remove it because it wasn't in line with the community standards. But I'm not aware of something they claim they removed by mistake, and that wasn't really a mistake. So I don't know if you have any example of that, and maybe if you can explain why do you think
so
that would be an intention
it's
from the
clear,
top
right? So,
ones?
so we saw that how, for example, Elon Musk, when they go to China, you had to play certain game in order to go into it, right? I mean, for example, I don't know if you remember Mark Zuckerberg, when he went into China, he was happy to sleep on the bed, just to get into, into China. And China's stance on certain content, it's, we know how they like, how they view certain content to be. So I think sometimes as a CEO, you need to go in because you are purely focused on the shareholder value. As a company, revenue, sometimes you do have to break certain rules, right? So I think that's where the things comes in. For example, in India, you can see Facebook is going massively, into India, but Modi, it's he has a certain political, religious view within the country. So how do you please, a leader who's actually wants, on one hand is telling you come into my country, on the other hand is telling you we are not going to tolerate certain kind of tweets, whether it's religious or whether it's certain political views. So I think that's where things comes in, and you hear these kind of a flip flopping for a big company like Facebook to say we accidentally deleted a tweet or accidentally deleted the content. Come on, I mean, you're talking about $1 trillion company with some of the best in mind working in this. There is no such thing as accidentally deleting a certain content, right? So this is just purely a politically motive. That's where the influences come from the top. By having a separate department whose actually their job is purely, just like the banks, compliance are separate from the risk taking. So basically, when something goes wrong with a bank, they can directly go to the compliance and check where the errors were made, and they can find them directly, certain measures. Right now, with a tech company, you can't do that because you can't. How do you measure where the influence or how things went wrong? By having a separate division, then they can, regulators can focus on the fine. Right? It's very easy to say you are 100 billion fine because you know what, there were systems in place you put in from the CEO. It failed to protect the public.
I say,
I think it's I just think I hear both things. Like, clearly you may have an assumption, which is fair, but I would say the best is just to also understand more realistically how
No,
that
it's not
works,
an
how the
assumption.
policy.
No, so
Well,
let me
of
tell you
course,
what.
Kieran, of course, it's
it's
an
an
assumption.
assumption
You
because
don't
I
work
believe
there. You have no
you
idea. You
haven't.
don't
No,
pretend.
I'll tell you why I work there. So I'll tell you. So sometimes it's great to draw different parallels, right? So in investment banking, you have this M&A departments. So M&A, when you're working on a mergers with a big companies, let's say,
But Kieran,
Apple wants to.
you're making the same point again. Clearly, she understands your point.
My
Kieran,
point is that I
your
think
point is made, Kieran.
what would also be interesting, if you can, is to maybe try to understand how the policy team and the policy team and those global operations work with the rest of the business, and
Yes,
how decisions are
and
being
that,
made.
yeah,
I think that will help your assumption and
of
maybe
course.
adjust in
Well,
a more sort of accurate way.
right.
But what I would also say is that this is a very recent decision we made in some countries, that we may need to meet somewhere in the middle with some regulation when it comes to, especially in India. But we've made mistakes. I think it's interesting that if we make a mistake in Nigeria, people believe it's a mistake rather than when we make a mistake in some other countries. So those mistakes happen because sometimes the algorithm will flag things that it believed it was something else. I took the example of the NSARS last time. That was the political riot that happened in Nigeria, and our algorithm thought it was related to COVID, but it was corrected in 24 hours. But the damage was already pretty big because we deleted 500 million posts on that. So that was a major mistake. But people believe, yeah, that's a mistake. So I think it's a bit of a double standard, but I do understand that maybe you don't trust the intention, which is fair, but maybe it's better to try to understand how the advisory board, how they make decision, and how the internal policy team works as well, and that will maybe help adjust your assumption.
Yeah. So Michelle, it's a really interesting point, that, and you have the impossible challenge of working with hundreds of countries on all of these content moderation issues. Countries have their unique moderation issues. Like some issue in India around, resign Modi has no relevance to any other of the 200 countries on the planet. So it's a very country-specific moderation issue, just as the recent Palestine-Israel one is specific to a region, just like the Nigerian ones are. So it's an incredible challenge often. It's not a one-size-fits-all global issue. It's 200 countries, all with oftentimes so many variety of issues, and no doubt you're using algorithms to try and catch behaviors of users which signal peculiar activities, and the algorithms. I think there is a logical argument to be made that when algorithms get used to try and notice patterns that they realize might be need to be silenced until further moderation, human moderation, can come into play and resolve it. And that requires, when those decisions are made, no doubt it requires kind of superiors, senior people to come in. It's not even, they're not going to let, the typical level moderators make a decision of, this whole topic should be not moderated. That requires a process of escalating within the hierarchy to senior executives who then can say, actually, even our humans might have not understand the full nuance of this issue. And that takes time, and maybe even a day. And in the recent cases where it was the Palestinians, in fact, it was the most recent example that I'm aware of. I'm sure that these are happening on a daily basis around the planet in some way. But in the one that made a headline was the Palestinian pro-Palestinians were saying that they were being moderated on Twitter. Actually, it wasn't even really strongly against Facebook. It was more around Twitter. And they were saying that they were being silenced. And then Twitter said, it was actually Twitter and Instagram, to be fair, and Instagram is under Facebook. So in the Twitter,
it was both. Yeah.
Right. So under Twitter and Instagram, isn't it interesting that they were both, Twitter and Instagram, simultaneously being accused of exhibiting the same behaviors? Well, how could that be if it was human based? It does actually help make the argument that they are algorithmically based, and that they're using similar algorithms to detect material and content that they need to, at least for the temporarily, diminish until further review can come in and review it. And in both cases, they did review it. They apologized, reinstated it. It seems rather logical. And Michelle was the one who highlighted us to the essence of the global scale of this difficulty of doing this thing. And the question is, how much time is reasonable time for a company, given the state of the art of what's capable in doing moderation on a global scale of billions of users? How much time is acceptable for that process of, okay, sorry, we did silence you because the pattern that we observed, the algorithms flagged it as problematic, potentially problematic material. And so it went into a sandbox. After further review, we realized, sorry, but that's just the way the algorithm works, is when certain patterns evolve, it gets flagged, it gets quarantined. And now we look at it, we realize there's no hateful speech there, whatever. It should be free speech. We applaud free speech, as their PR team said in both of those cases of Instagram and Twitter. And it's not. I mean, I'm not one to stand here and defend social networks. I mean, I'm the last person that would do this. I'm just trying to do a calculated analysis of what's likely realistically at play. Now, to Kieran's point, he does have an interesting point, and Michelle observes his interesting point, which is the banking system does have a more having been around for centuries instead of years, have a more evolved, disciplined process of responsibility and accountability and how these things will work out over time. I imagine it's safe to assume that no doubt the social networks will need to go through a similar evolution of how to refine and optimize this process so that people stop feeling like they're being silenced on social networks, because it is a headache for everybody involved, the social networks included. They don't like being pointed at and brought up in headlines that's questioning their ethics around flagging all of this stuff. They would love an optimized system that works win-win for everybody, no doubt. They take no pleasure in repeatedly going into the press and saying, sorry, we've screwed up again. And after careful examination, we realized this should be public information. We apologize. We've reinstated the content. And we hope this doesn't happen again. But of course it will. And of course it'll happen 48 hours later in another part of the world in some context. There needs to be a more optimized system, to Kieran's point, because in the financial systems, over decades and centuries, they have figured out how to do that. Well, unfortunately, the Facebook hasn't been around for centuries, and it's going to take it will take another, 2 years before it gets a little more optimized and the algorithms are able to operate in a more real-time scenario. That's my assumption.
Yeah,
I think. I'll go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, an interesting point I wanted to bring up, Tyler, because I think you touched on a number of key points, but I wanted to sort of add a different dimension.
Sure.
So, for example, safety tech is an emerging power sector, right? And the UK government sees it as potentially one of the, even bigger than fintech, right?
Yeah.
Now, isn't it interesting that some of the biggest leaders in safety tech are UK companies, and UK companies are introducing these laws saying, look, you need to sort out this problem, right? And at the same time, I'm not saying I'm a conspiracy theorist at all, but I'm just basically saying.
No, you make a great point, though.
I'm just saying, like, you have to probably look at what's happening with the safety tech companies. But the point I would like to make.
You got your
right,
point. Dial, you made your point so well that we're applauding you. And it was
okay.
the point. It was the point that I made maybe 30 minutes ago when I said, hey, who stands to benefit? Did I not say this, everybody? Did I not say who actually, if we follow is there a money trail here? Who stands to benefit from all of this regulation around moderation, et cetera, et cetera? Were you in the room when I said this, Dio, about 30 minutes ago?
I was, but you didn't sort of say it. So,
yeah, well, it's not for me to say. Yeah.
okay. I messed up then. Maybe I should.
No. I'm glad you're.
No. It's perfect. This is how it works. Tyler asked the question. You just you pulled it out. That's
what I'm saying. There's always motives behind the headlines on all sides. And that's what I'm saying. This is a game. This is the Lao Tzu's The Art of War at play day by day, hour by hour with all of these headlines. And people are... okay, thank you for the Eastern correct original pronunciation. But my point is that Dio, I think you are onto something, and I play the X-Files theme in jest because you do have to say, maybe I'm being a little conspiratorial, but there's usually financial motives at play behind regulations of all sorts, and what's really going on here, what's the real actors involved behind the scenes, behind these headlines, and I think it is interesting, and you make a great point, Dio.
But can I say just one thing? I'll say one last thing and then I'll shut up.
Go ahead.
If you don't mind.
Go ahead.
But I don't kind of want to let Facebook completely off the hook, right? Because there was a recent newspaper article, I think it was in The Guardian, looking at how Facebook sort of tackles minor abuses in rich countries, but kind of lets a lot go in other countries in Africa, right? So you kind of allow like leaders in Africa to do all sorts of things in terms of harass their citizens and deceive their citizens, seemingly, right, without too much restriction. So what might be interesting is, yes, Western economies are sort of being very heavy-handed on the platforms, but it seems as if it's taking the focus off other emerging markets that actually the dis and misinformation could be potentially more damaging in these markets because of all sorts of reasons. So it'd be interesting to see what Facebook's kind of comment is around that. I don't know, but yeah, that's it. I'll shut up now.
Again, another great point, but which, by the way, just for context, has been brought up before. I think Mabwana and others, you're Mabwana, right? You mentioned this before, which is,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, like, there's a number of issues here. Like, as Dai was mentioning, we have to be careful in emerging markets where particularly education is low. And so, and the whole world of the internet for some countries or some in those users is Facebook, right? So whatever they see on there is basically what they often think is the truth. I get so many ridiculous. For my dad, who was a civil engineering degree, is a businessman. From other people, which probably the bigger point here. He's probably just forwarding me, so I know. But I'll make another point. The fortunate time of the UK, in my first job, and we have to remember that. Imagine if we had social media in the age of like Wright brothers, or even just like the 1920s, and all the. Do you know how many planes crashed? And how quickly the government had to,
Great point.
the FAA, the CAA, and then you kind of fast forward to where I'm now in Tanzania. I remember I got my drone license, right? And I was incredibly impressed at how Tanzania was on that. I was the third person in Tanzania to get a drone license for private use. And they basically told me, hey, you need to have a police officer with you initially, pay them some lunch money, so of course they benefit that way. But guess what? For 4 years before that, I flew unregulated. A lot of the innovation that happens in tech happens in regulation, right? I wouldn't have been able to invest in it. A use case, right? So we have to I think it's interesting to drop house in the banking industry, aerospace. There's a lot of lessons there. Obviously now, like if a plane crashes, there's a whole process of how you find out how that works. And every country is pretty much abiding by the CAA, FAA, right? Which is it's flying is the safest thing you can do. It's safer than riding your bike on the road, right? But we didn't have social media back then to constantly criticize it. So I think we should cut Facebook a little bit of slack, particularly when it comes to this new sector of social media regulation across hundreds of countries. And governments need to step up. They need to create departments and work with Facebook and all the social media companies to figure this out. Like Tanzania is already doing this, but in a weird way by blocking, right? But they should be talking to someone. There should be someone in the Africa policy team at Facebook that works with the governments to figure out what's going on, and find a solution that works.
I just maybe quickly add to that. I actually just wanted to say that we have a very large policy team already working with most African countries. I mean, the intention is there. That's all I can say. But it's just a problem of, I think the issue is resources. And again, and it's not necessarily right. But again, I just want to clarify, I'm not the public speaking person for Facebook, but I'm just going to talk about the things I can speak about openly. So what I just want to say is that we work with those countries even when it comes to election and making sure that it happens seamlessly, because unfortunately our platforms are used to disrupt elections and so on. And so it's just a matter of non-scalable resources. So I just want to say this, it's not like there's an evil plot somewhere to deprioritize some countries. And unfortunately, when it comes to prioritization and impact, sometimes some countries may have less resources allocated than others. So it essentially boils down to it.
Yeah, that's my point, Michelle, is that Tanzania is behind. The government doesn't really understand how to engage. I'm sure if they engaged more strongly, like they do with the civil aviation around the world, it'd be better. I'm not trying to. I'm actually defending you here. Like it's just a really tough job that Facebook has to do this, especially when there's a lack of regulation or at least common standards. I remember back to my aerospace job, we were trying to convince the CAA in the UK to allow regulators to accept modeling and simulation results for certification of aircraft. Do you know how complicated that is? It's crazy because all these aerospace companies were submitting hundreds and thousands of docs. Now, can a regulator really go through hundreds and thousands of design drawings, test results? And this is a good use of VR potentially, right? How can you make it super easy for someone like in the regulating space to actually understand and flag things and make sure things are safe. It's just getting more complicated. The world is more complex. Things are getting harder to review and regulate. So I think it just comes with the territory. We're going to have this ongoing for a while, I think.
Yeah,
And
I
just to
think.
quickly add something
Okay.
there, sorry, I just want to say what's interesting is that you will notice that for a lot of those platforms, Africa is still, that's what we call a policy market, meaning that the policy team is more involved there and it's probably doing, if we look at different teams and resource allocation, it's probably more the policy team in Africa and the innovation team, like when we look at the subsea cable. So we're looking long term and short term, because I know the argument around they don't care, they just want to make money. That means we wouldn't even be in Africa in the first place. But it's essentially a policy market because of the whole misinformation and election turbulences and so on. But again, it's not enough. But the intention is there.
So
I
Tyler,
think
Africa, because I get
my
less
my
ads.
sorry my I think my
Great.
sorry I think my point was that you know if you're talking to the government, you're kind of in effect trying to work with, in some instances, the enemy, right? So a lot of, especially in certain places, the government itself are the source of a lot of dis and misinformation, right? For whatever political uh, reasons. What I would suggest, however, is if you work with innovative companies in Africa, right, to try and solve this problem, you'll be surprised, right, that there are a lot of safety tech African companies, right, that these big platforms could be working with, right, to help solve that problem. I don't think talking to the governments or certain bodies that are the source of the problems in the first place will ever help solve it. And yes, you're right, the markets may not be big advertising. The average CPM that is earned in Africa is a lot less than in other developed markets. You're absolutely right. But when you start thinking about your digital currency, the place that's going to have the biggest impact is going to be in Africa. So you have to start thinking about looking at Africa, not just in the long term, but yes, even in the medium to short term, it could be very valuable. I'm
So
dying there.
Tyler, if I can add another dimension to that, I think it'd be a great point. Which is, so I remember 2008 when the regulators. So the point that you raised about the banking industry has been there for hundreds of years, but yet they never had accountable compliance. They were doing a lot of shady stuff still, right? It took a
They
2008 crisis.
they still do,
No,
yeah.
no, they still do, but it took a 2008, something like a crisis like that, in order for them to realize that they need to have a separate, independent compliance department. But I remember when the regulators were forcing that, I remember sitting on all these board meetings, all the bankers were saying, this is the end of investment banking. The revenue is going to go down. Everyone's going to, get out of the industry. But that's what happened afterward is quite the opposite. The banking industry is actually thriving, right? Because what happened is you spend less time fighting the regulators because you have an independent body is there doing its job, what it's meant to do, right? So what is happening from these top tech companies, when I hear this conversation, that's exactly the parallel I'm hearing, because they are worried that the government will come in and put all this thing, they don't want to let go of control on certain department. The sooner they get into this, where they create an independent department where they can be held accountable separately on all of these issues. Look, as a father, I got 3 kids. My worry is this. Like the thing that headlined today on the UK, it wasn't about this. It was about the 2017. There was a girl. She looked at some of the online content. I think her name was Molly. Molly Russell in 2017. She committed suicide because she looked at some harmful content on Facebook. Right. So the point is that how do you, if you're a tech company, you can't be constantly fighting things like this for the rest of your, because you need to focus on other things. So by having a separate accountable department where that the department is there, they have all the structures, controls in place to make sure that they avoid these kind of content surface and internet. Then they can so I think that's where it's heading. I think the governments are laying the groundwork to tell the tech company, we can't break you because you are too big to fail. We can't break it yet, but there has to be in place that we can independently check what's going on inside, or
So
what are the
check.
controls we have in place.
Well, let me throw this article into the fire here. This article just coming in, really beautifully designed. I'm not familiar with this publication called restoftheworld.org, but just looking at it, it looks like it was very well crafted. The headline is an in-depth look at how a team of fact checkers at Alt News in India is struggling against misinformation spread by the ruling BJP party on Facebook. As the pandemic rages across the country, one team of fact checkers contends with a post-truth dystopia. And the key headline is, because so much misinformation in India is really hate speech, the lack of oversight has fundamentally altered the face of social media. But I want to read the first the headline here, and I'll share it from the Twitter account. It says, as the pandemic rages, it says the headline really is fact-checking Modi's India. As the pandemic rages across the country, one team of fact-checkers contends with a post-truth dystopia, asserting that the BJP party, which is the leading part of Modi's party there, that essentially you can't recognize, the truth from the fake news that is kind of inherent in all of the communications coming out of the BJP party, which makes it incredibly challenging for Facebook and fact checkers generally. The media fact checkers and the social media fact checkers can't keep up with. And by the way, America went through a similar. Journalists in America made similar claims during the Trump administration that it was the fact-checking machines just couldn't keep up with the communications coming out of the administration, and it made it incredibly challenging for the social media platforms as well. And those things don't scale, when you have it in America. That I can imagine when Michelle says that it's a resource issue, I can imagine that is very likely true. How many humans would it take to deal with this amount of stuff coming out of this amount, when you have America, India, et cetera, I can imagine it is a resource issue on some level. Yeah.
So, Cal, I think Tyler, maybe Cal can shine into this. India is a special case because if you look at BJP, their majority of the voting base, almost, 300 million, 400 million people in India are still illiterate. And that is a majority base for the BJP party. And what's happening with the social media now is that a lot of the other parties are using social media now to reach to, some of these bases. So that's what their worry is, right? Because they see social media as people being using as a tool to put the right information pretty much, because BJP is a kind of nationalistic certain Hindu strong stance kind of political party, which is still in a very tribal areas. That's where their massive voting base is. So I think so there's a dual play there, right? They in one hand that they're worried about fake information. The other hand is they're worried that there is a massive base that can get more educated, and so which they don't want. They want to keep them that way. So
well, this was partly Mabwana's point, which is in countries where there's still developing the education systems to be able to deal with. I mean, it's difficult for Americans. I would even say America is really suffering in this kind of media climate. The Europeans, I think, are a little better suited and skilled, and in fact, in Scandinavia and notably Finland, Norway, whatever, the folks are actually somewhat even trained on these issues. It's well understood that the media landscape is, a battlefield of conflicted interests, and they have this media hygiene is much more front of mind. Where America, it just pains me as an American living in Asia, working in Europe, to see my friends on social media platforms sharing stuff without much critical thinking applied to, they're just believing a lot of this stuff willy-nilly, and that's what this room is about, is people come in, share headlines. Okay, now let's really dissect this thing, given the brain trust on stage of our different disciplines and geographies. It's difficult for people to do this in whatever country they happen to be in. America is really suffering from it. America is not unique. A lot of places are struggling to keep up with this media landscape, and that speaks to the power and importance of this exercise that we do here in this room. Here's a headline.
That's why, Tata, I was going to say, that's why one of the things I would love to do, maybe as a nonprofit in Tanzania, is set up a Clubhouse Swahili to radio bridge. Because in Tanzania, most people get their news from radio or Facebook. Yeah. Right. There's a Facebook thing going around that's, questionable. Yeah, I'd love for Facebook's policy team to try and find that, but we can't rely on them. Right. Yeah. And so, but Tanzanians really love and trust radio. And so if we can
Buona, that would be just
in Swahili, where they could just hear the context and argument, it'll be really good.
Yeah.
So your idea is to stream. I'm just trying to understand to stream a Clubhouse room on radio.
Yeah, it would be to stream a Clubhouse, or like this room, say in Swahili, discussing this very.
Yeah,
wonderful.
And by the way, Mabwana, your signal's a bit weak though, but it's fantastic that you can join us from Tanzania. There was a lady from the satellite radio company. Remind me the name of it. They just changed their name, by the way. She's from Harvard. Gosh, dang it. Is she in the room? That'd be great if she jumped on stage. I'm blanking, but a Sirius satellite radio is pivoting, actually, and they're changing themselves to a media company.
Amanda,
Amanda, yes.
yeah.
And we were talking offline about, is there some opportunities around doing precisely this, like streaming this room on Sirius satellite radio? And she said there potentially is an opportunity, and that would be fantastic. So, we'll follow up on that. But to that point, hopefully this type of media hygiene exercise will get broader adoption internationally in every which way.
By the way, Yavuz, interesting guy on Clubhouse. Many of you might know him. Turkish guy, right? Very connected. Got to know him a little bit. He's got a African radio broadcasting platform, and he was talking about something like this. So we'll reach out and try and bring him in tomorrow's session, actually.
Here's an interesting article that Cheryl just found out of Australia, which is somehow relevant. It says Australian telco, leader Telstra, which is I think the largest of the telco companies in Australia, fined $39 million for exploiting Indigenous customers. Very interesting. The article continues. Australia's largest telecommunications company, okay, my guess was correct, Telstra, was fined $50 million approximately on Thursday, today, for unconscionable conduct in selling remote Indigenous customers mobile phone contracts that they did not understand and could not afford. So this is interesting because it's a case where a company is being fined for their customers signing contracts that they didn't understand, which this could get into murky waters. Where do customers understand what they are accepting when they sign up for Apple's services or Facebook services or Twitter service, all of this stuff, right? Will big tech companies now potentially face similar fates that, people didn't understand they were giving away their data and you tricked them into giving away their data? And you see what I'm saying, where this can become a really interesting, this is the beginnings of which might snowball. Because if Telstra is held up in this way in court, no doubt they'll challenge it, and let's see what happens when they challenge it. But it's an interesting first instance of a company being held responsible for contracts that their customers are signing, but clearly not understanding. Cheryl also shared another one here from South China Morning Post about Beijing summons online financial platforms, aka the big fintechs in China, and warns them over unfair market practices. Companies asked to attend include Tencent, Baidu, JD Finance, ByteDance, and Meituan. These are the huge tech giants of China, by the way. So Beijing is pulling in all of the huge Chinese tech giants. Regulators say there have been breaches of consumer rights, with some platforms operating outside permitted business areas. And this is just almost every day we've got more of these. And maybe David could help us get a little more on-the-ground context. China's top financial regulators have summoned 13 of the country's technology companies that run online financial businesses, including Tencent, TikTok owner ByteDance, and told them to step up anti-monopoly measures and halt the disorderly expansion of capital. And if I have to, and the next paragraph kind of hints, the People's Bank of China, the China Bank and Insurance Regulatory Commission, and the China Securities Regulatory Commission, and the State Administration of Foreign Exchange talked as one of the tech-run online financial platforms on Thursday, according to the announcement issued by the central bank late that evening. The companies, so I imagine this is all about reining in the fintechs and making sure that the state exerts their control over these major fintech companies, which have an incredible influence in how China adopts fintech and finance in general. So maybe it's not a surprise that the state is really exerting showing their control over the fintechs and letting them know who's the boss there in Beijing.
Tyler, maybe.
Florida.
Yes, thanks for pinging me in very quickly. But maybe that's also something to place at our session later this evening, because Stephen Ibaraki, he interacts very much between tech development companies, but also the regulators he's very close to. So there's a lot of insights, because there's of course a lot of the push and struggle. He's actually the one who launched that AI for Good summit together with ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, which is the regulating body. Thanks to that, we are here all talking over Clubhouse now. So there might be a really good conversation to see his insights later at our session, because there's a big move on the same sense. Are we using technology for the sake of humanity or actually against them, only for the sake to make money?
Well placed plug there for your room coming up, Lorian. People can find it by clicking on the title of this room, where you'll see the Tech News Club. We hope you do follow the club, because there are all kinds of deep dive rooms, just as Florian was plugging later today, around tech for good and using AI for good, which is a fantastic conversation. And he's got a great guest for that, as Ben did yesterday on all things about blockchain, which was fantastic. And he's got other similar events coming up. Hopefully we'll get Sid to do some really interesting stuff. And Jennifer, good to see you back here. And Sid, you shared a really interesting article on advancements around AI. Could you share that one?
Yeah, so I think I was looking into the research, so I tweeted it and tagged Tech News around the world. So the article is BCI, based on brain-computer interaction and machine learning, out of a lab in Stanford. They do a lot of intracranial BCI work, so something similar to Neuralink, but more at a research level. So it's a paper in Nature that they published. They made it public last September. So last year, September, there's a YouTube video, but it just got published in Nature and they added a bunch of results. Okay, past the boring stuff, the exciting stuff. So what they've shown is with people who've had paralysis for a few years, by planting a couple of intracranial electrodes in the brain. So, open up the head, put the electrodes in, and get direct signals, neural signals. They can actually do handwriting recognition. So if the person is sitting there with the electrodes plugged in, they can train a machine learning model to figure out how to type at speeds that are probably faster than, a 17-year-old. And the error rate is what is most impressive. Is it's with the autocorrect model combined with what the person is imagining and what the machine learning model is decoding, they can get to an accuracy of 99%. So an word error rate of less than 1% on short sentences, which is, I think, incredible. The challenge here is n is equal to 1. So they've tried on one subject because it's a complicated experiment. They have to calibrate almost every day, and the error rate increases if they don't calibrate. Calibration means they record a bunch of signals every day to compensate for the plasticity in the brain. So how these neuron encodings may have changed over time. But with this technology, that's not a big deal. You can imagine that the calibration process can go on every day. But I think this is an incredible step forward. I've been reading the paper. I'm halfway through, and it's a beautifully written paper. Like, anyone can kind of jump in and read it. You don't really need background in machine learning and all the jargon. It's a beautiful paper.
Yeah, but Sid,
so I highly recommend you guys read it. Yeah.
We can hear the excitement in your voice about this paper, and this is very directly related to the work that you do. Your position, the work that you do at Apple. This falls into your line of work, does it not?
Yeah, so I'm not particularly working on intracranial stuff.
I don't mean to infer that. I'm just saying that you are somebody who obviously understands and knows this space as your profession, and you're excited about this article. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I'm very excited about this because this is one of the biggest challenges I really am excited how Stanford has taken the step. They've shown that, this is possible on one person. We have to calibrate every day, and they explain why. And some of the graphs and plots that they show in their paper, they're just, it's a delight to see that, because when you read news, there's news behind the news and you have to guess. This paper, you don't have to guess anything. They talk about everything. So yeah, that's why I'm super excited about this.
I imagine you're excited about brain-computer interfaces in general.
Yes, absolutely. And I hope Stanford guys are talking, down the highway on one-on-one with the Neuralink people, and they are all friends. They're literally like classmates. The folks who've written the paper, they were classmates in grad school with the folks who are at Neuralink. So I'm sure
Do
there is
do
back
you,
channel conversations and collaboration going on.
Sid? Do you happen to have any guess as to why the Neuralink CEO co-founder stepped down a week or so ago?
No, no guesses at all there. Yeah. I actually haven't followed that news. I came across it in the Twitter on Twitter, but someone of the friends tweeted about it, but I'm not sure. I think Valley is just such a high turnover place that you may have found a good opportunity, or maybe they're running out of money. I don't know.
Or
One of those two
you're
things,
right.
maybe.
I mean, Elon's teams are notoriously
High turnover, yeah.
high turnover due to high stress, high pace, high expectations. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way.
I have a real quick question slash news.
Go ahead.
It's Nokia launching the blockchain powered data marketplace that is supposed to be kind of like a marketplace as a service that allows to monetize data safely and securely. And it's kind of the idea is that AI needs secure data. Has anyone kind of done a deep dive around that? It seems to be that they're pushing a lot of news around that. Have you guys talked about that?
That's a huge idea that you're sharing there. That I think that is difficult for many people to digest. Maybe we should unpack it a little bit, because you're right. AI is built on data essentially, and very structured, neat data, not just random data. And many people fundamentally don't understand this point, which is to make AIs work, they need very structured data. And the most data in the world is not structured. And the real challenge of getting AIs to work into new disciplines is to structure the data so that the AI can do what the AI wants to do. And structuring the data itself is quite a challenge, and it's can be, in many times, a very manual process, semi-automated, semi-manual process to get the data into a structure that the AI can digest and do its magic on. And your point is that data becomes very valuable if it's structured correctly, and there should be marketplaces for valuable data, and this valuable data arguably should be on blockchains and done in an efficient modern type way of utilizing blockchains to create marketplaces for structured data. Am I getting close to what the point the article that you're raising?
Yeah. So it's talking about how there's a report that 60% of image data sets are under attack. So there's cybersecurity threats, and so followed by 10% text data sets and 5% recorded data sets, which
but they're being attacked because they're perceived as being valuable.
Right. Well, it becomes a problem with if you want to have good AI, you have to have good data sets. It's the old thing,
Correct.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
So, which is why Nokia is pushing this marketplace for data to help establish better AI applications.
Yep.
So I just kind of was, interested in if other people are in this space or looking into this, because I thought it was very, very interesting.
Give the title of the headline one more time, if you would, about Nokia.
Right. So this is from Analytics India magazine. What's inside Nokia's blockchain-powered data marketplace?
Cool. Please tweet it and CC Tech News Around the World so I can retweet it, because that's a very forward-looking big idea indeed. Because it could help accelerate the adoption of AI, and it's friends of mine in the AI space in Stockholm are working on specifically this problem of how to automate structuring of data so that the AIs can do the AI machine learning process, but basically working as a kind of expediting and speeding up this whole process of structuring the data so that it can be used in the machine learning applications.
Hi, Tyler. This is Johan, and this is actually what we do at Crawler. We call it enrichment of unstructured data. Johan done speaking.
Thanks, Johan. And there's others. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's one thing to keep in mind as we talk about data. I think decentralization of data is one thing, but I think there's a huge field in machine learning that's coming up. It's called split learning, which is closely related to edge computing. So edge computing is as your devices become more and more powerful, and people's data is being processed through these devices, it'll be more and more common that the machine learning models are sitting on the devices, running on the chips on the devices, instead of sending data back to the cloud. So split learning, it basically sort of splits the machine learning model into two. So that's like kind of a pseudo cryptography where you can translate intermediate steps of the AI model and split it between the cloud and the device. So that can actually, it's a good alternative to doing this data centralization, which can be pretty expensive.
Yeah, this is actually why I got onto this page or this article, because I was looking about stuff about federated learning, kind of doing a deep dive around that, and that's what this would make possible, basically.
Yeah, so federated learning is a little bit different from split learning. So split learning is you're still using the power of the cloud, but you're encrypting the representations, intermediate representations of this data that are running through half the model, and the other half is running on the cloud.
Very cool. Super cool. Thank you to everyone who's sharing all of these fantastic, as Carl just said just now, my feed is becoming saturated with tech news around the world tweets, and it's a wonderful thing. I have to agree. We stumbled upon this new format now, where instead of flooding my DMs, people tweet articles that they find, and if they think it's relevant to tech news around the world, all they have to do is add us to the tweet at TNATW, and then I get a nice feed of them, and I can cherry pick the ones that we want to talk about and retweet them to the. Let's see how many people are following now. So we're adding about 50 people a day. We're up to 650 followers just in the past 10 days or so. So let's see.
Let me tell you something funny, Tyler.
Yeah.
I just tweeted something that said to the effect that after the Kieran discussion we were having about, critical thinking around the articles and what you've been driving in the discipline there. So I said, this is like a live MBA masterclass on critical thinking. And one of the professors at London Business School emailed me saying, "Don't take me out of a job."
Yeah, I don't know if we're more of a threat to traditional tech journalism, or to the MBA process.
Oh, to MBA schools, yeah.
I imagine the journalists are nervous because they do not come on stage. They dare not jump up here because, And by the way, Cal, I think you were in a room recently on the topic of can Clubhouse moderators compete with traditional legacy media and etc. And my thought around that is, I would love to see the LA Times tech team compete with this room on our ability to get down into what's really happening, because they've got angles and we are geeks, and we didn't go to journalism school. We went to tech schools of all different types. Try and compete with David around tech in China. Try and compete with Mabwana around, investing in startups in Africa. Try and compete with, Michelle and
the other strength that, if I'm observing, right, in this experiment that we're doing, because overall the entire thing's an experiment, right? We're going to learn. Who knows where we'll be a year from now? But one of the other things that I'm learning and observing is that there's a certain amount of tolerance to, and that's just the way your culture that you set here, a tolerance to kind of not properly formed perspectives that the rest of the team helps you form into something bigger, right? So that allows people to come into the game. Journalism has to be perfect, right? So and all has to happen in the background, and then something comes out, right?
Great point. Yeah, great point. Yeah, you're right. They are forced into very tight boxes. We don't have to play into at all. We get to go hog wild and free thinking. We can even do crazy conspiracy theories. We can go there if we want to. We can go into the Rumble room if we need to. We've got all these avenues. It's a wide open playing field to play around in that they do not have at all, because we're not conflicted in any which way, really. The truth will rise to the top. We get to debate it from all angles. Welcome to the stage, Harry and Patrick, and thanks for your point, Johan, about the enhanced structured data point. Any other headlines anyone would like to share from the top? I've just got a few others in my stack, but
Harry, I see you're relatively new to Clubhouse and
yeah,
you're a fairly young guy compared to a number of us here.
Yes, I
So
am.
welcome.
I'm 20. Thank you for allowing me to share the stage. It's
sure.
really an amazing opportunity. I just wanted to ask and circle back to the conversation about Nokia's blockchain marketplace for data. I was wondering what you guys think about that being like another um, way for data brokerages, and if that could lead to another scandal like Cambridge Analytica and SCL and data in politics.
Yeah, data gets you. That's interesting. Interesting thought. What's your take on it?
Well, my take, I guess, yeah, it will make it easier for lots of politicians in different spaces to get access to that data and in a secure way, and probably a lot more behind the scenes. So I guess if also you do it online, like, you're probably less likely to have the photos of people in meeting rooms and all that to leak, and having whistleblowers. So I guess it might make it a lot more easy to infiltrate elections, but with data, if it's really secure and possibly anonymous.
Well, wouldn't it be interesting to think about what was Julian Assange's platform called?
I can't remember. Oh,
WikiLeaks.
WikiLeaks. Yeah,
WikiLeaks.
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 Yeah,
What happens if it's a blockchain based WikiLeaks and there's no
yeah.
longer a person to arrest?
Exactly, that's insane. I guess that's the scary part of the other end of the equation that I like to think about, and I want to hear your thoughts.
But you know what's
There's
funny?
also not a way of erasing it, of course. So there's nobody to arrest, and there's no way of going back on it.
Of hiding the data, right? But here's what's interesting: is WikiLeaks. Just to ponder this for a second, because Julian isn't so much of a hard geek. Wiki, you know, when Larry Singer created the Wikipedia as a co-founder of Wikipedia, although Jimmy Wales gets all of the credit as the face, it was really Larry who did all of the actual kind of technology work behind the scenes. And Wiki is a really interesting platform where people can contribute information, and and you can build an encyclopedia out of it, as Jimmy and Larry did with Wikipedia. But it could be used for other things, and it was used for other things. And in fact, the startup that I did with Jason Calacanis started out on Wikia, which was the platform underneath Wikipedia, and we used it for a different purpose. So I know a little bit of what I'm talking about here. However, that was 2007, before really the adoption of blockchains. Now, what if Julian Assange had been 10 years younger or coming out today? He wouldn't do it on a wiki. It wouldn't be WikiLeaks. It would be chain leaks, blockchain leaks, crypto leaks. So where is crypto leaks, by the way? I will predict right now that it's coming. I predict that will come out in the next 12 to 16 months. Somebody will make a crypto leaks, and you will have a decentralized whistleblowing global thing, and that prophecy, that spark of an idea that Julian had, will be fulfilled. And it will be interesting to ponder what happens to him personally once that is there, because then it doesn't really make much sense to punish him as a signal to other people to not do that, when there's a new layer of innovation that makes it manifest in a way that you can't control.
Makes it so much easier too, just to like co-op conversations and destabilize and whistleblow in general.
Can be used for that purpose, sure. But I mean, the idea of data on blockchains is a really, and you could, once, I'm just highlighting the WikiLeaks scenario just to highlight just how powerful this idea can be, in just one of many potential use cases. I think it's inevitable. I think it's truly inevitable that
Tyler,
yeah.
I mean, this is why it becomes so important that whatever you put on the blockchain is true,
anonymous,
in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but true, because it's not going to go away.
Yeah.
It's going to be there forever. So, imagine, we write something, us like, did this or that. it's going to be there forever. I can't take it away.
Yeah.
So that's why garbage in,
But
garbage out once more. So how we verify the trueness, in a sense, of the data when put on the blockchain is always going to be an issue, which is why the identity part is such a big thing too.
Right.
How to
So
verify identities and so forth and so
let
forth.
me unpack that for some folks. So you have the blockchain, you have Bitcoin as one of the first big use cases of the blockchain. It's a financial use case where your wealth is essentially transferred to a blockchain and exchanged with other people who also have their part of their wealth on the blockchain in the form of these Bitcoins. And it's an international way to it's exchangeable through the power of technology, blah blah blah. Now, to what Azak is pointing to is uh, this has always been sort of understood as step one. The next really interesting step is, what if we get our identities onto a blockchain and out of the hands of the governments, just like we're trying to get our wealth out of the hands of the governments, in the form of fiat currencies. Our wealth should exist separate from the government's fiat currencies. All the work and labor that I do and should exist above the layer of the Thai baht or the British pound or the US dollar. It should exist in a globally traded and not under the jurisdiction of any government, right? And all of ours should be, and we should be able to trade with each other in that sense. And that's the big utopian vision of Bitcoin, a decentralized Bitcoin on a blockchain, and the blockchain enables that. And that's why people are so enraptured by this fantastic opportunity. But it goes deeper, because our identities should similarly, equally, be also unrestrained from government controls of national passports and government ID cards. We exist separate of the governments. And there are millions of people who do exist that have no government ideas of any kind, yet they still exist. Just to prove the point that you can exist without government IDs. Millions of people do, and it's a real problem, actually, for them to even move from geographically across borders. So why shouldn't there be a blockchain-based, internationally recognized identity system that we could all prove our identities on these blockchains? And then your identity on that blockchain overlaps with or cross intersects with your wealth on that blockchain, right? Potentially. So that's where that becomes very interesting. And then you can add another cross intersection of your data and data generally, and which data do you associate yourself with and not, and verify, yes, this is my data, my health data, my medical data, my education data, here's all the data that I claim association to. And then there will be datas that nobody claims association to, and everyone will recognize it as such. No one's claiming that data. Or somebody is, but they're anonymized. And that's where the whole concept gets very interesting indeed, because you could start to take ownership of your data and verify data that you want to associate yourself with on the blockchain in a very provable way. And other people can't really take that away from you, and etc. It's a super interesting concept. That's why we do these deep dive rooms that Ame and Ben, and we're very thankful that they do these rooms, because they're very complex topics that deserve hours of deep dive. That's why we do the deep dive rooms. So please do follow the Tech News Club, because you'll look on that page, you'll notice there's upcoming deep dive rooms, and Florian's doing one on AI for good, and no doubt Ben's got another one on, and Ame's got another one coming up. And Ame's brilliant because she's really understands the fundamental importance of getting more women engaged in this, which is a unique challenge, as they're thus far not adopting it at the same rate, and that's an important barrier that we need to get over, because you don't want disrepresentative adoption of these things. We all need to, because it's power. Knowledge is power, and if you get too many of people land grabbing the knowledge, then it causes friction. So it's it's a big crazy game. But that takes us 4 minutes past the top of the hour. We will meet again in just 6 hours, where there will no doubt be more tech news from around the world to share. And please do join us to help us do this fantastic brain trust futuristic news digestion regurgitation process, which I adore, and I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for enabling this. So hopefully you can join us 6 hours from now. If not, hopefully you can join us tomorrow. Bring a friend as we help explore